Hello, welcome to today's video where we are going to be discussing relationships and emotions. More specifically, we're going to talk about stages of relationships, types of messages in relationships, and dimensions of intimacy, gender and communication, relational tensions and problem solving, and giving constructive criticism. So let's get into it. So we're going to kind of go into stages of relationships. Before we do that, I kind of want to talk about, so what are the common reasons we know that people are attracted to other people or get into relationships? So here's what we pretty much know, and this gets researched. You can do focus groups where you ask people one-on-one questions and things like that and kind of really get into some details. So appearance obviously plays a role. This tends to be more important in the early stages of relationships. Similarities. So do we have mutual interests, or do we see the other person as similar to us in some significant way? Complementary traits. So this is basically just traits that balance each other out well. So for example, while on one hand we look for similarities such as I'm outgoing and they're outgoing, so therefore I'm kind of attracted to them. But sometimes if you're maybe, say, more introverted, you might be attracted to somebody who's more outgoing, because that can help bring out your personality a little bit more, and they kind of balance each other out. And you being introverted, you might be able to rein that person in a little bit in a healthy and productive way. So sometimes complementary traits can be just traits that balance each other well. And then sometimes we're just looking for rewards, which is basically what are you getting out of that relationship. So let's go back over all of these, just to bring up a couple of sort of like important notes to draw from this. So looking at appearance, so a couple of things. Appearance tends to play a bigger role early on when you first meet somebody. And one of the things that I wanted to kind of point out about that is, so first of all, that's not shallow. Okay, it's actually logical. It makes sense. So when you first meet somebody, you don't know much about them. So when you don't know much about them, of course, you're going to base your attraction to them on appearance, right? It's the only thing you have to go on. Okay. So you're going to base it off that. Now, as you get to know them, I believe I mentioned this in an earlier video, that as you get to know the person, you will base your attraction to them on other factors that are important to you, whether that's similar interests or personality, anything else that kind of matters to you, because you start to learn about those other factors, right? And then appearance starts to usually play a lower role. And this kind of goes back into that phrase that you where the more or less you get to know somebody, the more or less attractive they become, right? That's where this comes from, because there's some truth to that cliche. Because the reason they become more or less attractive the more you get to know them is you get to base it on more than just appearance, right? And so appearance tends to be a big role early on, and then it tends to fade based on whatever else matters to you. So for example, if similar interest matters to you and you don't have a lot in common with them, then maybe appearance still then maybe they become less attractive, right? Or if ambition really matters to you and they're very ambitious themselves, they're very like career oriented or career driven, then maybe they become even more attractive to you, right? So that's kind of one of the things to keep in mind about appearance, is it tends to weigh less as you get to know somebody more. Um, all right, so similarity versus compatibility traits. Again, this really kind of depends on the person. So there are obviously people that say, I want to have a lot in common with my partner, right? Or with the people that I'm around. I'm kind of talking about most of this from an intimate relationship, somebody you're dating or you're married, right? That kind of situation. But obviously, some of these dynamics can apply to other types of relationships as well. So there are some people that look for a lot of similarities, but there's other people that don't necessarily care about that, right? That in fact, if anything, they see it as it can be healthy to just have interests that are separate. We don't have to like have mutual interests in everything, right? And so that kind of depends on you, right? So some people look for a lot of similarities, they're drawn to that. Other people don't really care much about that. I mean, obviously, there's going to be certain things they care a lot about that you have in common, but in the grand scheme of things, they're not looking like, do you have similar hobbies, right? That kind of stuff, right? They may be only looking for the deal breaker things that you want to make sure that you have in common, okay? Versus other people that want you to have a lot of similarities. So this really kind of varies by person. And there's other people that, again, they see traits as sometimes if they're different, they complement each other well. So again, just really depends on the person. Now, the rewards thing, I want to circle back to this just a little bit to kind of point out. So, how about that? What do I mean by that? So, sometimes people stay in a relationship because they see some sort of benefit to it, or they're getting something out of it. And now that can be good and that can be bad, right? So, for example, um, obviously a good thing is if and really if you think about like a relationship, any relationship, if it's really a healthy relationship, it should allow you to grow into into the best version of yourself, right? The person that you want to be, that is the best version of you, that's the happiest, that's the most productive, that's leading you to your ideal life, right? That's leading you to the pinnacle point. That's it should allow you to do that. It should aid you in that. And so that's like a healthy reward. Now, obviously, there can be dark rewards too. It's sort of like sometimes an abuser stays in an abusive relationship because they like the power of being the abuser, right? If we're going to go like real dark, right? If you want to look at the worst extreme of this, or sometimes people stay in a relationship for vanity reasons. They like the fact that the other person dotes on them. They like the fact that they get all that attention. They sort of um, they take some sort of pleasure out of that. If you want to think about this away from the intimate relationship context, an example of this would be if you look at social media. Do you think that there are people on social media who are perhaps addicted to the attention? And even celebrities sometimes, right? Who are perhaps addicted to the attention, and that is sort of driving their behavior on social media, right? To get the follows, to get the likes. And not just about the money. Obviously, there's a financial component. A lot of this gets monetized, right? If you're a popular figure, right, on different platforms. But do you think some of it's like a psychological standpoint of just getting the reward of being addicted to the attention? I think you can make the argument that yes, right, that happens. So it'd be like that, where somebody keeps somebody around, or they stay around because they're getting some of their collateral benefit, right? Or you could just think of people that stay in parasitic relationships where maybe there's a financial situation where they're kind of leeching off the other person financially. Like if you just wanted to more like the most practical, they're obviously getting something out of that situation. So the rewards thing can kind of go, it can go to dark places where people are staying in relationships for dark reasons, and it obviously can be positive reasons because it's actually helping you be a better person, right? If we're talking about a healthy relationship. Another really thing that I wanted to kind of bring up, because this just gets completely lost on people, and I think this is a good life, if you're going to you take these courses, and you're not going to remember everything, but like one of the things that I think is actually really important to remember here about relationships is this is something that just people don't do. And then they're shocked that they're not dating the kind of person that they want to be with. And it's like some of it's, again, it's a you problem. Look in the mirror. You're not doing everything you can to make it happen. Now, here's what happens. So we know that people get drawn for all these different reasons, roughly speaking, right? But nobody ever stops to ask themselves this question that you see on your screen, which is whoever it is that you're attracted to, like the ideal person. Let's say you're single, and in your head you're just thinking of the person you want to be with. Okay, nobody stops to ask themselves, how do I, while still being myself, I'm not saying you be fake or you don't be you, right? You still got to do you, but how, while I still being myself, do I attract the type of person that I want to be with? Nobody asks themselves this. Okay, how do you attract the person while still being yourself that you want to be with? And here's how we know nobody asks themselves this, right? Go on all the dating profiles and the dating apps, right? And you'll have these profiles, and it works on both sides, by the way. Like every party's guilty of this, of the sin here. But like you'll have these guys, and it's easiest for me to talk about this from a guy perspective, but like there's these guys, right? They'll set up the profile. And that guy, again, he's, not meaning to disparage anybody. This is just a hypothetical, not intended to resemble real individuals. Although it's going to sound like I'm describing me, but you'll have these dudes, and it's like they're in their mid 40s, they're balding, they've got the beer belly, totally out of shape, right? Their financial situation's a little questionable, right? But who are they looking for? And they'll say, I want to date, must be under 30, 18 to 29, fitness model, right? So in other words, they want to date the model. She's got to be super hot and no kids, no baggage, all this stuff. Meanwhile, he's got two kids he doesn't see that his wages are getting garnished for child support. He's not in shape. He's not that age range. He doesn't have his crap together, but he wants to date the model, right? And vice versa, by the way. There's girls out there, they have their profiles, and she's got three kids from three baby daddies. One's getting out of prison soon, right? And he's got a temper. And she's got all kinds of baggage. She's unemployed. She's not in shape. But the guy she's looking for, he better be under 30, drive a Corvette, own his own business. He better have all his crap together and he better have no baggage, right? So, in other words, people, now a couple of things. I'm using this to illustrate the example. This is not to judge anyone. In fact, that's a big pet peeve of mine, is I think a lot of times people are judged in society very unfairly. Because there's a lot of different life reasons and circumstances why people are where they are that I don't think it's fair to judge them on. So I'm just using these hypotheticals just to point out that it's not to judge people in these situations, but it's to say, you will see people, they're always out there saying, I want to date the moon and the stars, but I'm not in space myself, right? Like, I'm not any of the things they would be attracted to, right? And so I'm not judging them for their situation, the people in sort of what's considered a bad situation, or even wanting the moon and the stars, right? But here's what I'm saying. So again, looking at it from a guy's perspective, if that's the girl you want to date, that's fine. No judgments. Hey man, go get her. But here's the thing. If you're going to date her, to even have a shot, you've got to ask yourself the question right here. You got to say, while still being myself, am I willing to do the things it takes to be the kind of guy that girl would want? So you want the girl in shape, you got to get in shape. You want the girl with no baggage, you need to clean up your backyard, not have baggage. You want the girls financially secure, you probably need to be financially secure, right? And if you're not willing to do the things that so first of all, people, the point of this, the real takeaway is that if there's a certain person you want to date, ask yourself those questions and say, am I willing to do it? Am I willing to be what it takes to probably get that kind of person? And if you are, do it. And if you're not willing to do it, then you have two choices, really. Your two honest choices are to accept that you're not willing to do the work that it takes. And you're probably not going to get that kind of girl. Again, from a guy's perspective. You can flip this, of course. Or, apply it to whoever you're looking for. Or you need to change your expectations, right? Your second honest option is to say, all right, well, who else can I get, so to speak, right? Like, change who you're trying to date to a different standard. Now, those are the two real choices. Now, there's this third choice that's happening in modern society, particularly with guys out there who are just, they choose a third path, which is, not honest, which is to say, meaning you're not being honest with yourself, which is basically they're just bitter at women. It's like they're all shallow and it's their fault. They won't give me a shot and I'm still the same person, even if I don't have all these things in order in my life. Personally, I think that's a BS cop out. Like like I said, you're just lying to yourself that you're not willing to do the work that it takes to be the kind of guy that girl would be attracted to, man. That's on you. That's not on her. Because, oh, by the way, these things aren't all shallow. So, like, take the financial thing. Is it shallow for somebody to be looking for somebody who's financially stable? No. Once you get past, a certain age, that's not shallow because it says something about your level of responsibility, right? It says something about you. How you take care of yourself physically, right? Is it shallow to say you want somebody in shape? Well, you could maybe say it's shallow, but you could also say it says something about how much you care for yourself and will care for other people. Because if you can't take care of yourself, or how are you going to take care of other people, right? Like, I mean, there's ways to read into this that's not shallow. Having your finances together says something about your stability. Your health says something about how well you take care of yourself and the type of life that you lead, right? So my point is, look, I'm just saying, if you're not dating who you want to date, you got to ask yourself this. You got to ask this question on the screen, and people just don't do it. And the reason that we know that they don't do it, and there's people that actually research this too, by the way, that when you look at dating profiles and you look at what people are asking for, basically people in their life situation, like their situation is like a 6, and they're always looking for a 10 instead of saying, how do I elevate? How do I become an 8 or a 9, and then I'll get the 10? Right? Nobody wants to do the work. And so I'm just saying that I think that's an important takeaway here, by the way, is to be willing to ask yourself that and just be honest and say, am I willing to do what it takes to get there? And if not, I either got to change my standard or just accept that you're not willing to do the work. Personally, I think the third option, which is in the last several years, we've seen spur up a lot, and certainly with young men, is this notion of taking a third path, which is just to be bitter at women, I think is an absurdity. You're just not being honest with the fact that you're not willing to do the work it takes to be with who you want to be with. And again, you can apply this both ways because I see women do this too with who they look for in a guy. And again, you could mix and match whatever genders you want here. This happens all across the board. And so again, this is just like a practical piece of advice to think about that you'll find, by the way, that people also, when we do research and studies on people that are in the relationships that they want to have or want to be in, and they've done this analysis. They've sat back and thought, what am I doing? Who am I being? Am I the kind of person, right, that they would be attracted to? And have I done the work to get there? So that's just something to really kind of keep in mind that people just don't do, that I think is important to think about. Okay, so we talked about some of the reasons people tend to get attracted to each other. They'll look for similarities, obviously appearance early on, mutual interests and things like that. All that plays a role. And then when you start to get into a relationship, there's also then these stages. So the stages, these are called NAPS, 10 stages of relationships. So not every relationship, goes through every stage, but a relationship that kind of runs its full gamut would go through every stage if it like sort of reaches its peak and then potentially ends. And if you think about it, most relationships in your life end. Absolutely, most of them end, whether they're friendships or intimate relationships, right? Not to be cynical, but that's just a statistical fact. It's not an opinion. Here's how we know that the most of them end. So let's look at intimate relationships. Unless you marry your first crush or your first boyfriend or girlfriend, most of your relationships will end, right? Like you're not gonna, whoever you stay with forever, assuming that even happens, there's going to be plenty more that didn't work out that way than did. Same thing happens with friendships, right? You have more friends than you do lifelong friends, right? So most relationships end. So they will end at one of these stages typically, but this kind of gives you the full gamut. So at first you have initiating. So this is when you just first kind of, you're meeting somebody, you're first sort of talking to somebody, you're not saying in a relationship or anything, or even seeking one out. You're just in this like filler stage of sort of seeing, what do I think of that person, right? At all, right? Experimenting is when you kind of go to you're asking them some questions, you're getting to know them a little bit, right? This could be for a friendship, it could be, whatever it may be. It doesn't mean this has to be, again, an intimate relationship. But this is when you first start to get to know each other. Intensifying is when something happens where you start to develop some sort of feeling. So this is where it starts to become an actual friend, right? Or an actual potential intimate partner, right? And so that's when you start to really sort of, this is now ramped up to where it's going to be a real significant relationship, okay, in your life. Integrating. This is when you kind of, boom, it's now a relationship, right? So the parties kind of take on an identity as a unit, as the couple, so to speak. And even this is when it's kind of solidified, like, yeah, we're friends, right? If we're talking about friendships, right? So your friends, boom, it's taken on its own little identity. So integrating is if you think about it, even most people that you get to know or meet don't even get to this stage, right? Because most people that you interact with don't become actual friends, like real friends beyond acquaintances, right? Think of like going from experimenting to intensifying as integrating is kind of when you go from acquaintances to friend or acquaintance to somebody that you're having an intimate relationship with, right? Bonding is now, okay, so you started to, let's just think of like the intimate relationship example. So integrating is, again, you start to develop this identity as the couple. Bonding is now you start to get closer and closer, right? Intimacy can happen through shared experience. It can happen through shared understanding. Sometimes it just happens through time, right? Because time creates the shared experience. What I mean by shared understanding is knowing more about you, getting to know you more and more, right? Because that actually builds intimacy because they know things about you that other people don't know. So that's that bonding stage. We get close. So this is when somebody becomes sort of if it's a friend, it's acquaintance to a friend to a good friend, right? To a close friend. Um, or if it's an intimate relationship, this is when you've kind of become a couple, and now this is really getting into that honeymoon stage. You're really getting close, okay, to each other. Now, so you bond. This is kind of like the peak of the honeymoon stage, right? Everything's great. Then you get to this stage called differentiate. So what happens here is some of the we orientation, like you're getting closer together, you're doing everything together. Now it shifts more back to an I focus, meaning you start to maybe do some more things on your own or break off a little bit. It doesn't mean anything's wrong with it. And by the way, um, this doesn't mean anything's wrong with the relationship. So, because if you think about it, if you go back to like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I'm sure you would have heard of at some point in a class, if you take classes in psychology or sociology, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is basically needs that we all have, right? And it's this pyramid. At the lower level, you've got things like safety, security, food, and shelter, and then you move up, and it becomes things like the need to be liked, the need to belong, the need to fit in, right? But there's also a self actualization need in there, which is kind of like the need for your own individual identity. So we have this, and by the way, we have this like push and pull there. So on one hand, everybody has a need to fit in, belong, be loved, right? So we have this pull towards relationships. But we also have this need for our own individual identity, which is counter to that, right? So when this differentiating stage happens, where you start to um, kind of focus more back on your own identity and your own interests away from the relationship, that's not unhealthy. That's you trying to balance both needs. And in fact, that's one of the things where people will sometimes mistake that for being unhealthy, right? And it's not. You're just filling your need for your own identity, which you have. And so that doesn't mean it's unhealthy, but you start to do some things on your own. In fact, I think the reverse is unhealthy. So we've all known couples like this. Maybe you are this couple. I don't know. Maybe you're in this kind of relationship. We all know couples like this where they can't do anything alone. So your friend's dating somebody and you like want to go to dinner, want to go to a movie, and they can't. They got to bring Pookie Bear. They can't go by themselves, right? I mean, they just literally just can't do anything without their partner. Okay, everything's meshed together. The friends, every hobby, everything is assimilated, right? Now, I think that's unhealthy for two reasons. Now, first of all, again, more of a just flat out not an opinion. We just know this through psychology. Again, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Everybody has a need for their own identity. And when you have meshed everything with your relationship, you no longer have your own, everything's we and us, and there's no I. How do you express your own individual identity? Right? Now, you can try to like cut that off all you want, but eventually that's going to be a problem down the road. The person's going to lash out, right? Because they're going to feel constrained they're not being allowed to be who they are, right? Or who they want to be themselves alone as an individual. And you got to allow both to happen if you want to have a healthy relationship, by the way. So it's not healthy to just mesh everything like that and not let people have their own part of themselves, um, and it's probably it's like hobbies, right? So I'm a really huge baseball fan. I have loved baseball for 3 decades. Anytime I've ever dated somebody, I do not care if they like baseball. In fact, most people don't, I would say. I think it's boring, right? That doesn't bother me because that's a part of my individual identity. And would it be nice if the person likes baseball? Great. But they don't have to, right? It's not, that can be my own separate thing. And if I'm going to go hang out with a friend, I can hang out with a friend without my partner being there, right? because that's a part of your own individual identity. So I just think if you mesh everything, you're asking for trouble just because we know that logically everybody has a need for their own identity and you're cutting that off, you're cutting off a part of who they are, and eventually that's going to become a problem in the relationship. And here's the second practical reason, it's more of an opinion as to why I think that's unhealthy to mesh everything. It's this. Remember I said most relationships end? So here's the problem. When you've meshed everything, then when the relationship ends, it's going to be a lot harder on you. Most relationships end. Most couples break up. And when you break up and now all of your friends are mutual friends and you did everything together, that breakup's going to be a lot harder, right? Because the friends are picking sides. You've brought them into every aspect of your world, and you either now have to leave that dynamic or of your world, or you have to find a way to get them out of it, right? So in some respects, you can argue that when you mesh everything, you really make the breakup harder. And again, not to be cynical, but most relationships do end. And so you're not driving ahead of the car very effectively if you don't think about that and just mesh everything in a relationship. So that's another reason why I think it's kind of unhealthy, actually. All right, but anyway, so that differentiated stage isn't necessarily anything wrong, right? And people sometimes mistake it for that. No, you're still, everything's fine. Circumscribing, what's going on here is this is okay. You went through the bonding, the honeymoon period. You start to differentiate a little bit. This is where you kind of get comfortable and you start to go into patterns of behavior. So you tend to sort of it's kind of like going through the motions with how you interact with each other, and your interest and your communication, your commitments to each other, your follow through kind of decreases a little bit, right? So this is sort of like the first year you're dating somebody, or when you're first kind of dating, but you're not really a thing yet, you're not an item. Everybody tries a little harder, right? And but then now you're a couple and we're 4 years in and maybe you're not trying as hard anymore, right? And that's what this circumscribing means. It basically just means you're kind of going through the motions. Now, again, some of that's natural. It's a natural stage. It's a natural progression. We do that with everything. I mean, the first time you drive a car, you are more nervous than after you've been driving for 10 years, right? Or when you buy a new car. When you first get a new car, man, the first couple times you're driving it, you're super nervous, right? You don't want to wreck that car. You don't want somebody to hit you. You're parking at the end of the parking lot so nobody dings your door, right? And then eventually you get more comfortable and you relax a little bit, right? It's kind of like that. So it's kind of a natural behavior. It doesn't mean anything's wrong yet, okay? Although I'm going to come back to that in 1 second. Then you get to what's called stagnations. All right, so now we're getting to these final 3 stages, and now we're getting into problems, right? This is Danger Zone Will Robinson. That's an old reference. Nobody will get it. Stagnation. So this is when growth kind of stops. So now, not only are you going through the motions, but you're really not trying anymore. Like, meaning you're not really trying to create like significant memories or solidify or intensify feelings. You're really going through the motions with everything and just growth stops. And there's 2 issues here why this becomes a problem. So the first one is, I mean, if you just think about, I've used the phrase a lot before in other videos, like learning is remembering. So sometimes in life, if you think of something you know from something else in life and apply it to something else in life, like this other thing, it can really give you some insights. So for example, you take the field of biology. There's a phrase in biology, which is whatever doesn't grow dies. There's just a rule of law in biology, in life. If something is not growing, it's dying. Okay. Well, when you're in stagnation and the relationship is no longer growing, one of the ways I've heard this referred to in psychology is you're not creating tent poles in the relationship, meaning you're not creating really significant, memorable moments or things that really intensify your feelings towards each other. You're not growing the love, so to speak. Then that relationship's going to start to die because it's not evolving anymore in a way that makes each person, helps them become the best version of themselves they want to be. Okay. So that's one of the reasons it's a danger. Another reason what I think goes wrong here with relationships is that, so on one hand, we naturally just kind of get comfortable and go through the motions. So that's, on one hand, that's natural. But there's a difference between natural and really, man, you're just not trying anymore. And then that causes the relationship to end. So again, this goes back to like, you're dating the first year and it's Valentine's Day and you're showing up with, or I don't know, maybe Valentine's Day is a bad example, but I don't know, you're showing up with roses and your poem that you wrote. I don't know, it's good. It says you love them. Um, and you just, home cooked meal, and you just, or I don't know, you took them to like the fanciest restaurant. You went all out, whatever it is. You just went all out to show them you care, right? You got the poetry and the flowers and the most expensive place, and I don't know, the handcrafted jewelry, whatever you did. You just went all out. Now it's year 5. Um, and now you're just like, oh crap, is it Valentine's Day? Here, I picked you up this gas station card. Happy Valentine's Day, Pookie Bear XOXO. You know, feel like a you know, feel like a TV dinner tonight? Like, I'm thinking Taco Bell. What about you? Like, in other words, your effort just goes down to zero. And then people are shocked when that relationship ends and the person, they just lose interest and you break up, or they look outside the relationship, they cheat, that kind of stuff, right? Now, here's what I'm trying to say here. Now, in terms of like the cheating thing, like I'm not condoning that. I think that that's one of the worst things you can do to somebody. There's no excuse for that. I personally think that is just a awful, ridiculous, horrendous behavior. And if you want to play around, that's fine, but be single. Be honest with the people you're messing around with. That's all, right? Um, it's like when the Tiger Woods thing happened, when he got busted for all his stuff. It's like, I don't judge what Tiger Woods, whatever lifestyle he wants, that's fine. But don't get married and have kids and, right? You're lying to a lot of other people. That's what you don't have a right to do. So I'm not condoning that. But what I'm saying, it doesn't make whoever cheats, it's their fault. It's on them, right? That's on you. But what I'm saying is, when you're no longer giving an effort anymore and you've taken circumscribing to just total, your effort went from 180%, 200%, right, on year 1, and it went down to 5%. You can't be totally shocked when that starts to put the relationship on stilts a little bit and there's a chance you're going to fall, right? Because now you're giving no effort. And so the person, they're going to have less interest, right? Just naturally, because you're not trying as hard anymore, right? They're going to lose some interest. They're going to also maybe feel like, whether it's conscious or subconscious, that you don't care as much because you're not putting in the same effort. I'm a big believer that, like, you've got to, in some respects, I'm telling you, it is natural that your effort, we know through research, like, it's just and just human behavior. Excuse me. It's natural when you get comfortable with something for your effort to come down a little bit. That's why I gave you like the car example or any other situation in life. But what I'm saying is, you still have to be aware to make the conscious decision is, I'm not going to let my effort go from 100% to 5%. If it goes down to 70, okay, that may be natural, but I'm still going to try. I'm still going to, if we're staying in a relationship situation, I'm still going to let you, make sure you know that I care and that I love you, right? And so when your relationship goes down to 5, I'm saying, you can't be shocked then when that person doesn't feel as much as loved or cared about, and they might feel taken for granted. And they might start to look outside the relationship for things. Again, if they cheat, that's still on them. It's still their fault. But what I'm saying is, don't create a situation where something's more likely, right? So, if somebody breaks into your car, that's on them. But you don't leave the door unlocked. Also, don't leave a bag in the back, right, with your untinted windows for them to steal, right? So that's kind of what I'm saying is, like, pay attention to your effort. Don't let it go down to 5, man. Don't let it go down to 5. And that's what a lot of people do. And that's when you get into circumscribing the difference between healthy, going through the motions, and where it's unhealthy. It's unhealthy when your effort's 5 versus, say, 70, 60%. So stagnation is everything's stopped, growth is stopped, avoiding. So this is kind of where, yeah, we're going through the motions. And now when problems happen, just avoiding them, man, right? Not even dealing with them. And the reason that becomes a problem is if you're avoiding the problems, then of course they build on each other. So obviously, if there are big ticket items, they're like deal breakers, and you're avoiding them, they end the relationship because you're not dealing with a deal breaker. And if they're small items, sometimes they're the straw that breaks the camel's back, because what happens is they build and build. And some people will feel, even though it's a small issue, people will feel resentment about it because sometimes it makes them feel like, well, this may be a small issue and you may not see why it's a big deal to me, but the fact that you won't change it and you said you will, that says something bigger about us, right? I think I mentioned in an earlier video that there's a difference between the substantive and the relational component of communication. The substantive is what are you talking about? The relational is what does this say about us? And again, you can apply that to nonverbals too, to like actions. So if there's a small thing that really bothers your partner and you just won't deal with it or refuse to deal with it, sometimes they will look at that and go, well, the substance isn't a big deal, but the relationship part is, because this says something about how much you care about me, right? That you won't deal with it. Because by the way, the whole it's not a big deal cuts both ways. Because if it's not a big deal, why won't you change it? It's not a big deal, right? Because a lot of times people go, well, I'm not going to change because it's not a big deal. I don't know why you're so upset about that. It's not a big deal. Get over it. But in the same time, they can flip that on you and say, well, wait a minute. If it's not a big deal, which you're acknowledging, then why wouldn't you change it? Right? And they start to resent that. It starts to build. Or they, like I said, the straw that broke the camel's back. They add it to all the other straws on the back, right? It's a culmination of things. So avoidance, and then finally you get termination where the relationship ends, right? And so if you see on this chart here of the stages, this is the stages. And the advantage of the visual is to see that there's a difference between sort of like what's healthy and what's not. So generally all the coming together stages in that bubble, everything's fine. That's the natural positive evolution of a relationship growing, becoming closer together. Relational maintenance can all be fine too. So again, integrating, seeking your own identity, that can be fine, no problem. Differentiating can be fine. So where you're, I'm sorry, I got those a little confused. So bonding, differentiating when you start to develop your own identity, that can be fine. Okay, because again, you have your own individual need for identity. Integrating, that's where you start to bring things together, you come closer together. That's obviously fine. Circumscribing, going through the motions, that can be healthy too. It's natural to do, right? We do that with everything in life. There's no reason it wouldn't happen in relationships too. Okay. Where it starts to be bad is when you get to stagnation, right? Where not only are you just going through the motions, but you've really just stopped evolving as a couple in any way, right? That kind of stuff. So one of the ways to look at this is it kind of tells you what's the healthy stages, what's the unhealthy stages. And a relationship, of course, can kind of end at any stage. But another thing too is if you're having problems in a relationship is maybe asking yourself, is it dealing with which one of these categories is that problem dealing with? Am I in a healthy stage, unhealthy stage? And obviously some of this can be a gray area when you get to stagnation versus circumscribing, right? That whole going through the motions too much or not. But you can look at this and say, is the problem relating to one of these stages that I need to fix, or is my relationship at one of these stages and I want to make sure it stays in a healthy one, right? So that's some different ways to use this, some like things to think about. In terms of types of messages in relationships, obviously there's several. There's what are called substantive messages and relational messages, which I kind of just talked about. Substantive messages are what are you talking about, right? When you're having a fight, what are you fighting about? Okay. When you're talking about something significant, what is the actual topic? Relational messages are basically things that we take away verbally or non-verbally from what does this say about us? So when we're fighting, if you're verbally abusive, that says something about how much you respect me, right? Or how you think you can treat me. Because if you did it, you must think you can do this, right? And then you've got these substantive relational things. Obviously, you need to keep those in mind. Like, are my actions saying something about us that's really unhealthy? It's going to really create a problem. Languages of love. So this is basically kind of an interesting one where there's been research on, you say somebody loves you, so how do you know, right? And people will usually report it's through these kind of like three broad categories. So words, act, time. So in other words, you have to show, if you want to show somebody you love them. So again, most relationships end. So you got a choice, right? Relationships can end because of external factors outside of your control. They can end because of the other person. They can end because of you. It could be both of you, right? But obviously it's ideal if it's not because of you, right? You want it to end, you don't want it to end because it's your fault, right? So you want to pay attention to like how do you express to people that you care about them. So words, act, time is basically where most people take that they feel that they're loved. So words is obviously the things that you say. Acts is obviously the things that you do, and time is like a time commitment. Now, one of the things that's going on here is if you're really good in one of these areas, or if the relationship is healthy in one of these areas, but you are neglecting in another one, oftentimes that can be, again, the straw that breaks the camel's back. That can be the hole in the dam. That can be the problem. So it's sort of like you say the right thing, but your behavior doesn't match. They're not going to feel loved, right? The time thing. You say the right things, maybe some of your actions match, but you're not really putting the time commitment into the relationship. Okay, so that creates a problem. This is why. Do you want to give you look at an example of how this can be significant? This is part of why long distance relationships struggle. Because if you're in a long distance relationship, you can say all the right words because you're long distance, you can talk to each other, but it's hard to have acts and times to show that you care about, you have time commitment, show that you care about the person because you're not around each other, right? And so the relationship tends to lag, and obviously there's several other reasons. So pay attention. Am I showing the person I care through all three dimensions? Then you've got dimensions of intimacy. So this is basically getting close to each other. And the three types of intimacy that you tend to have is physical, intellectual, and emotional. And so, like, if you take a standard friendship, usually that's intellectual or emotional connection, right? You're just drawn to their personality or something like that, right? And then an intimate relationship, somebody you're dating, ideally you would have all three. Like, if you want to think of like the perfect person, obviously it'd be somebody you're physically attracted to. It'd be somebody who intellectually um, you're stimulated by, you like having conversations with them, right? You enjoy talking to them, and that you have an emotional connection to too. So ideally you'd have all three in any kind of like healthy intimate relationship. These obviously vary by person too. So there's some people obviously where physical attraction is more important than others for other people. For some people, emotional attraction or intellectual attraction is more important, right? So that kind of, there's not a right or wrong there. That's kind of up to you. Relational tension. So this is basically research into what are the common things in a relationship that cause the most often cause conflict, right? So you've got connection versus autonomy, openness versus privacy, predictability versus novelty. So connection versus autonomy. This goes back to, again, that need to like be your own individual versus the need to be loved and be liked. So we all want to fit in. We all want somebody to be there, and we want that relationship, but we want to be us too. We want to be an individual. And if you think about that, those are those like butt heads, right? That doesn't like this doesn't seem compatible on the surface. Openness versus privacy. So on one hand, it's nice to have somebody to talk to. It's nice to have somebody to let into your world, to share life experiences with. So we want to be able to have an open dialogue with people and to talk to them. But we also have a need for privacy too. Just like it's almost like you have a need for your own identity, but you kind of also have a need for some stuff that maybe only you know about you, and you don't really want to share with other people, and you shouldn't have to share with other people, maybe, right? At least if you go on just basic human behaviors of what our psychology tends to say, it's that we do have this need for privacy. So you have to balance that, right, in a relationship. And that's also a common problem where one person thinks you need to be more open about something, another person feels like wants to be private, and that creates that relational tension. And my point about going through these is these are things that you should be thinking about, as these are the most common problems. How do I plan to deal with these problems, right, in an effective way, whether it's through communication or otherwise? You want to, like, again, drive ahead of the car, be aware that these are the common tensions. Predictability versus novelty. And this goes back to, again, are you going through the motions too much? So we all have a need for predictability, spontaneity. We like that. That's why you go see a movie that you haven't seen, right? Or you like to watch a new show because it's a new experience. Or people that, and again, this varies by person. All of these vary by people. Some people are more open than others. Some people are more private than others. So take predictability versus novelty. It's like there's some people that like to travel. And what's going on with that? They enjoy, I would say, the predictability of, for them, their level of predictability, their need for that is probably higher. And they're expressing that through travel, right? Because you're going to new places you haven't been before. Or, like I said, watching a movie you haven't seen or a show you haven't seen. But we also have a need for novelty, meaning there's a sense of security in knowing what to expect. So this is why maybe you're going out to eat. You can go anywhere. You could go to a new restaurant, but you go to the one that you know because you trust it. You know it's good. You believe it's good, right? This actually brings up something, a little like side note about communication. Again, some of my background is like media effects and studies into media and stuff like that. And I used to never understand why people would watch movies that they've already seen or a show they've already seen, right? And so, like, I could never understand for years why people would buy DVDs. I was like, well, you already saw the movie. Why would you buy it? I don't get it. You already saw it. Why are you watching it again? I never understood this. And until I started to see some research on, so one of the things that happens, like, so why are people drawn to watch a show they've already seen or a movie they've already seen, they watch it again? And now if you think about it from a psychological standpoint, it's because it fulfills both predictability and novelty at the same time. So the novelty part is you've already seen it, so you know that you like it, right? You know there's parts about it that you enjoy. But the predictability part is you're probably not going to remember every scene or every line, right? So you're kind of getting both, and that's part of the draw, right? And so that's kind of an example. So movies kind of illustrate both. Like when you're seeing a movie or a show, the predictability, if it's brand new, is there. If it's something you've already seen, you're kind of getting predictability and novelty. Um, so those are kind of like the tensions that you have to balance. So I mentioned like you want to drive ahead of the car. You want to think about these as affecting your future relationship. So go back to, are you going through the motions too much? Are you going from like circumscribing, which can be okay and natural to go through the motions, versus stagnation where it's too much? So think about, here's why that matters. Because if you're going into stagnation where it's really going through the motions too much and your effort's crap, the reason your relationship's now going to have a real problem is what's going on. It's too predictable. There's no novelty. There's nothing new because you're not trying anymore. And now that person is not getting really a core need satisfied, right? And so that's where it creates a problem in the relationship. So again, these are just the most common problems. You want to think about ways. How do you want to handle these, right? And ask yourself too, like, which one of these matter to you? Which ones are going to be likely tensions? Do you handle them well? So like openness versus privacy. How do you handle telling people things about you? How do you handle telling them significant things about you? Have you really walked that through in your head? Have you thought it through in your head, right, about how you're going to handle these situations? So just problems you want to head off at the pass. Other types of relational problems that most people most often report as to why they break up. Again, you do like these focus groups, and you ask people all these questions, um, all kinds of stuff. Lack of commitment. So this is just, again, this usually goes back to the word acts time. They're not showing they love them in one of those ways. And so therefore the person feels like you're not committed. And so if you feel like they're not as committed as you are, right, that can definitely have them pull away. Disrespect. So just feeling like you did something that's just crossing a line somehow. Again, think of things like infidelity, that kind of stuff. Or like how people fight is a common one. If you fight in a way that's very disrespectful, and eventually that, again, it says something about how you feel about the relationship, or how you feel about them, how much you respect them. And if you disrespect them, right, that starts to build and eventually can lead to a breakup. Problematic emotions. We're going to talk about emotions later on in this PowerPoint, but just not dealing with your emotions well in a way that's healthy and productive. Distance. So again, long distance relationships, usually it's hard to have words, acts, time, all three love components there. Conflict style. So are you volatile when you fight, right? Do you blow up? And then you do things that just exasperate the problem. Avoidance. Do you just not deal with problems so then they get bigger, right? And then there's issues with validation, meaning you don't really validate the other person's side or perspective. You never, like, it's basically just like not acknowledging them, right, where they're coming from. Like you can disagree with somebody, but you still should like acknowledge where they're coming from, right? Or this kind of goes back to the whole pick and choose your battles, right? Like there's a lot of fights you see in relationships where people, it's kind of like, I guess the best example is like you think of just like the stereotypical like grandparent couple. I don't know if you guys experience this, but like the grandparent couple who are like they're just nitpicking at each other over everything, right? The married couple that's been together for 40 years or something. And it's like they're fighting over stuff that like doesn't matter. Like they're sitting there um picking on each other over whether something happened on Tuesday or Thursday, or whether the car was red or beige. I don't know. Like just stupid stuff. And it's like this doesn't matter, right? Like pick and choose your battles a little bit. And so there's times when does it really matter that if you're right or not, right? And is it really worth the fight? And regardless, even if you disagree and you think it does matter if you're right, it's okay to validate their perspective now and then. It's okay to say, we don't agree, but I know you're upset. I understand you're upset. And so I'm just going to fix this. I'm going to try to fix this because you're upset, right? And I don't want you to be upset because I care about you. Like you could do that, And so basically just not fighting in a healthy way is what I mean by conflict style. So that creates problems as well. All right, resolving problems. How do you do it? You double down, you triple down. Never admit that you're wrong. You plant your flag and you just say, this is the hill that I'm going to die on. I'm just kidding. You shouldn't do that. All right, what should you do? Well, you're not going to win friends and influence people if you do that. I will say that. All right. So how do you resolve problems? Most common ways to resolve them the most effectively is talk about the problems and why they matter. So make sure you're actually communicating about them. Okay. And not only that, but why they're important. Validate the other person's perspectives. Take responsibilities for issues that you can take responsibility for, and apologize if that's appropriate. Take action to actually resolve it, and follow up to see if things are improving. What the heck do I mean by that? So talk about problems and why they matter. So one of the first things you got to do is, this sounds pretty like obvious, pretty intuitive, but people don't do this, which is make sure you've actually told them it's a problem. Like you'd be surprised, like people that go into they're in these long-term relationships and they go to like as you know, I'm an attorney, so I'll do a lot of domestic relations, divorce, custody cases, and people go to marriage counseling. And they're like, well, we have problem A. And the one spouse says there's problem A. You'd be shocked how many times, like, one of the first things the counselor says, I mean, I'm obviously not in these meetings, but I know counselors will, and I don't see the transcripts or anything, but I know counselors will say this early on, which is, well, did you tell them it was a problem? Did you actually tell them? Because you'd be surprised how many times there's a problem going on, there's something stupid going on, or something unhealthy going on, and the person who's doing it does not realize it's a problem. They don't realize what they're doing. And you may be like, well, that's not, come on, right? How does that happen? Well, you know that happens. Again, learning's remembering. Here's how you know that happens. Think about it. Think about your past relationships that are now over. Okay. Have you ever looked back on a relationship and you did something really stupid, and you look back now and you're like, what the hell was I thinking? Why did I make that decision? Why did I do this? Why did I do that? That was so stupid. Like, we probably all have done that. I certainly have done that. That's an example of it. I've done lots of ridiculous things in relationships that at the time, I didn't realize how stupid it was, right? I wasn't thinking right about the situation and I did something stupid, right? Or at the time, I didn't realize, like, oh, this is why that could cause a problem down the road. This is why that's not a good idea, man. But you're not aware. This goes back to, again, I mentioned earlier a video, the Joe Harry window, about how you've got information that and other people don't know, or that you're not aware of and other people aren't aware of. And I said that the worst kind of information is when you're not aware of something and nobody else is aware of something, so nobody can tell you it's a problem. So it's kind of like what happens here, because if it's in your relationship, odds are a lot of people don't know about what's going on but you and the other person, right? For some things. And you'll make a mistake. Well, if you don't know it's a mistake at the time, there's nobody else there to tell you it's a mistake, right? And if they don't tell you. So my point is, sometimes people really are not aware that something's a problem. So you got to make sure you actually tell them this is a problem. And then you got to say why it matters. And what I mean by that is you have to explain why it needs to be fixed, why it's a big deal. It's not enough to just say it's a problem, because what will happen is sometimes people will go, they may realize it's a problem, but they'll say to themselves in their head silently, even if they don't tell you, well, it's a problem, it's not that big a deal, right? You're making too much of it. And then they don't fix it because they think, oh, she'll get over it or he'll get over it, right? So the person who has the problem, the person who's aggrieved, you need to make sure you say, no, this is why this matters. Okay, this is why this is a big deal. Why maybe it's small in isolation, but it's one of 10 small things that are happening right now that's a problem for me, right? You need to actually explain the impact, okay? And I think that's fair. I think that the other person deserves that personally. Like if you're in a relationship and there's a problem, they deserve to at least be given the warning shot. You need to fire the warning shot before you break up, right? Like let them know, like, hey, unless you really think it's just not salvageable, but I think they need to know it's a problem, right? And then let's say somebody tells you something's a problem. Even if you don't agree, you can still validate their perspective. So even if you don't think it's a big deal, you don't think they should be upset about it, you don't think it matters, again, pick and choose your battles, and sometimes you can just at least, even if you still think it's a battle worth fighting, you can still at least acknowledge, I understand where you're coming from. Like they do have a right to feel how they feel, right? So do that because that can go a long way too. And then take responsibility for the things that you're at fault and actually apologize. That's the other thing too that happens is people make a mistake and they're just totally unwilling to actually say they're sorry, you know? Um, again, what's your goal here? Is your goal to have like a stay in this relationship and have it work? Then you might need to be willing to apologize now and then if it's your fault, right? So actually being able to apologize. I mentioned in an earlier video, when you apologize, you need to say what you're apologizing for and what you're going to do to fix it. So again, you can't do the whole, I'm sorry, baby. What are you sorry for? I'm sorry you're so upset. You can't do that, right? You got to say what you're apologizing for and what you're going to do to fix it, or they're not going to believe it, right? It's just going to be condescending. And then to again actually do something. You got to take action. You don't want to apologize, then you do jack about it because then they no longer trust you, right? That just eats away at your credibility for all future apologies, for all future problems. They just think you're not going to resolve them. And then follow up to see what things are working. What that just basically means is you can apologize, you can take a step to resolve it, but you still got to do a check in, later to be like, okay, is this still a problem? Right? Is this still bothering you? Is this still where are we at on this? Right? And you got to figure out maybe a more, come up with a better way to say it than I just did. But you got to do that check in, right? Um, Other things you can do, integration. So this is basically where you try to make these opposing forces work, and you're probably going to have to use this at some point. So again, it's sort of like the need to belong and to be in that relationship, but the need to have your own individual identity, right? And so you got to figure out a way to make that work. What's the right balance for you and your partner where there can be a we, but there can still be an I, right? Um, so you just got to find a way to do that instead of just and obviously you have to consider their perspective as well, but just be aware that that's something you have to balance, or trying to balance um, the fact that you're going to go through the motions, but you still want to insert some spontaneity, right? Because that's a basic human need for everybody, right? So it's kind of like that, right? Recalibration, which basically just means like ask yourself, addressing or reframing the issue so it's not as big of a deal, so the tension is minimized. So what I mean by that is sometimes we get all worked up about something, and you've got to ask yourself in retrospect, you got to sit there and go, does this really matter as much as in the moment I'm making such a big deal about this? Right? So again, this goes back to not just pick and choose your battles, but pick and choose an appropriate response, right? Are you bringing a gun to a knife fight? Okay. So meaning it's overkill, right? Bad analogy, I guess. But like you can't overdo it. And sometimes there's something you're making a big deal. You're like, this is really, really important. And so therefore you're overblowing it, right? Um, it's kind of like, guy's going out with his friends, and again, I'm just using these gender because I'm a guy coming at it from a guy's perspective. Guy goes out and the girlfriend's like, well, text me when you get there, or text me when you're leaving, or something like some sort of check in, right? And the guy's like, I'm not gonna check in. I'm my own man. You're not the boss of me, right? Um, okay, you know if they're the boss of you, like right? You know who's the boss of you, right? Um, so if you know the truth, why does it really matter? And look, by the way, they're probably not doing that to show you that they're the boss of you, right? They're doing it because um it's just like they want to make sure you're okay or everything is going okay there, or they want to know you're safe. Like text me when you get home, right? So that's an example. Like you'll have the guys who are like, I'm not doing that. You're not the boss of me, right? And they get all upset about it. And it's like you are again, you're bringing a gun to the knife fight, right? You are exasperating this issue into some sort of thing that it says something about who's controlling the relationship when in reality, A, nobody's supposed to be controlling the relationship. It's supposed to be a relationship, right? Like an equal partnership. And B, does it um does it matter when you know the truth, which is that they're not controlling the relationship, right? Whether you text or not, you know what the situation is. You know it's just so they know you're safe, right? So it's just rethinking about things. A lot of times we just make problems into these like bigger things than they really are. So all recalibration is trying to get you to do is just to ask yourself, like, does this matter? Is this a deal breaker? Is this a big deal? Is this really something that I'm making it out to be? So I mentioned this before in this video and in some other videos that, again, when you use an effective apology, when all these things do get resolved, is you need to accept responsibility, say what you're apologizing for, what you're going to do about it, express regret if that's necessary, explain sort of why, you wish you didn't make that decision, show again how you're going to fix the situation, and ask them if they forgive you. They don't have to forgive you, by the way. This is an old man phrase, but there's a phrase, sorry doesn't fix the lamp, man. Like, there's certain things you can apologize for, but you can't take them back. Once they're done, they're done. And you need to remember that. And that should, by the way, be the reason you need to remember that is you don't screw up a relationship. Because remember, I said they can end because of external forces, your fault, their fault, both of your fault. You know what the one you don't want it to be is your fault. Because that's tough to live with. It's tough to live with something going wrong and the knife's in your back and the blood's on your hands because it was your fault. You did it. That's really tough. Okay. Especially if they're like, we're talking about relationships, like, especially if they're like the one that got away and it's your fault. So you need to be careful about the things you do. There's that phrase, choose your words wisely. When it comes to relationships, you got to choose your words and your actions wisely because they have consequences. And you cannot talk your way out of, communicate your way out of, or apologize your way out of everything. Sorry doesn't fix the lamp. It's still broken. The lamp's broken. You can glue it back together. It's still it's still got a crack, right? And so remember that. You don't get to apologize your way out of everything. And that gets lost on a lot of people. All right, giving constructive criticism. All right, so let's say you got to criticize somebody, and this can be used in a variety of contexts. So a couple of things to keep in mind. So there's a problem, you got to bring it up, and you're going to kind of do it with some constructive criticism. And again, this could be interpersonal relationships, professional relationships. This works both ways. So a couple of things. One is consider the setting, appropriate setting, and then what that means is physically, when they're comfortable. It's not just place, but it's also time and place. So in other words, are they ready to listen right now, or do they need more time to cool off? Could be something like that. Another thing to think about in terms of appropriate setting is, are other people around? Like if you're going to criticize somebody in front of other people, particularly if it's certain other people, they're going to get defensive. They're not going to be receptive. Again, if we're going to talk about intimate relationships, this is sort of like you criticize your partner and you do it right in front of their friends. You're less likely to get an honest, real response because you're potentially invoking a defense mechanism, right? So it's thinking about that. Choose the time and place wisely. Separate the people from the problem. This kind of goes back to principled negotiation, a concept I'd mentioned in an earlier video. So in other words, focus on what the problem is instead of just calling them names. Okay. And communicate in what's called an identity-saving manner. What sometimes in communication is referred to as identity-saving or face-saving. It basically just means in a way that is not going to get them defensive, or that's not like really attacking them as the person, as the spawn of Satan, right? And instead just focusing on the problem. I need this behavior to be changed, right? Be specific. So about what the problem is and what you think it means, and why it matters, right? Again, so people know why it's a big deal, and then like what you want to have happen going forward. So just spell it all out, right? This is what's going on. This is what I think this says or means. Here's why it's a problem. Here's the consequences, and what do you want to do? And again, just overall focus on what's productive, what's going to solve the problem, and what you can actually control in the situation, okay, moving forward, and what they can control, right? What can they reasonably do at this point to try to resolve the situation, okay? So, as far as like the different interpretations, this kind of goes back to that example I used previously where I said if somebody's coming late to class all the time and they're always late, or they're always late to a meeting. Now, a lot of people will do this. Like an instructor can pull them aside and say, you need to fix your attitude and take this class more seriously because you're always late and it needs to change if you want to pass this course. Now, what I did there is I just blamed them for the problem. I said, the problem is your attitude, right? You don't care. You need to do better, right? Versus if I had said, so I notice you're late all the time. And there's a couple of issues. One, it's kind of disruptive because if I've got one student who's always coming in 10 minutes late, it kind of like sends a message to the other students that that's okay. And then they start coming in late, and so it gets disruptive. Disruptive that way. And so I wanted to see, what's going on with you. Is there a particular reason that you're always late? Are you having an issue getting to campus? Is there something going on at home? Are you coming from another class to this one? Like, what's going on here? But because right now all it's doing is giving me that impression that you maybe just don't care about the class, you don't take it very seriously. So I've got to figure out what's happening. So what I do now, this time I describe some different interpretations. It could be that you don't really care that much and that's why you're late. And then I also talked about some other reasons, right? Maybe you're coming across campus from another class, or maybe you've got a commuter situation that makes it difficult for you to get here. But I went through all these things. Now, first of all, even if it's kind of like an attitude, and by the way, I also explained why it's a problem, because it just basically looks bad, and now everybody else in the class thinks they can show up late too, right? So a couple of things. Even if it's still they're late because they're lazy or they don't care, they are now much less likely to be defensive because I gave them some outs, right? I gave you an off ramp. Okay, you could say it's something else. You could, I gave you a face-saving opportunity to save, not get defensive, and have an out. And so you're more likely to take one of the outs and not get defensive, and also then maybe feel some sense of like, well, I guess I should be here on time because he did talk to me about it, right? And so you're just more likely. And by the way, sometimes you get an honest answer. Like I've had classes like that where, guess what? A student's late all the time, and there's like a real serious reason that's understandable. Something's going on, right? That I get. So, sometimes you're not only it's not only wrong to sometimes initially judge what's going on or what the problem is, but when you initially judge it as whatever your interpretation is without asking them to tell you from like, hey, this is what I thought it was, you tell me. When you do that, when you give them more choices and you say, look, this is what I think it is. It could be right, could be wrong. You tell me. You're more likely to get the honest answer, and you're more likely to get them to just not be defensive. And sometimes the honest answer is something that's not as nefarious as you think, right? It's not some awful thing. Also, the reason you don't want to jump on it is because, again, sometimes somebody's doing something stupid and they don't realize they're doing something stupid. They don't realize something's such a big deal, right? They don't understand why it necessarily matters. So it's just good to kind of go through these steps when you're going to give constructive criticism. Okay, so we are going to talk about emotion in the second part of this video. So I will see you guys there.